Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my 2023 LCK Spring Split Finals overview and analysis. Incredibly excited to get to this video. I really appreciate you guys' patience on this one. As you know, I was at LCS Finals this past weekend, and so videos have been a little bit more difficult with all the time that was taken up by going to see semis and finals in Raleigh, but I'm back, and I'm trying to make these videos. I'm trying to get them out in a relatively good time. Hopefully, today is going to be a double upload. You should be seeing this as well as the LCS Finals video, but today we are here to talk about the LCK Finals in particular, and I'm incredibly excited to go over it. Of course, if you want to know my preview for this matchup, not only did I cover it at the end of round 2, I covered it at the end of the semifinals a little bit as well, so you can check both of those videos out. In fact, you can check out a full playlist for my LCK playoffs up in the iCard right now, but today it's all about crowning ourselves an LCK champion. And it's the two orgs that we know and kind of expect to be here at this point. So before we jump into everything, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of this series. Did you think it was going to go the way that it did? Who did you want to win? Who did you expect to win? And who ended up coming out on top in your eyes in terms of, expectation? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions on everything down below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our analysis of this series. We're going to be going over it game by game, as you guys know, and it is a matchup between what is pretty undoubtedly the two best teams in the LCK right now, that being the number 1 seeded T1 and the number 2 seeded Gen.G. I mean, these are just the two teams that, have kind of overperformed the competition the most. You can throw a team like KT Rolster in there for being interesting. You can throw a team like Hanwha or Damwon for, being kind of intriguing on paper, but in terms of both on paper and execution, these are the two teams that have stood at the top of the LCK, and they absolutely deserve to be meeting here in finals. And you know what? It's not a surprise. I mean, Faker versus Chovy, it's a matchup that is incredibly familiar to LCK fans. This is the same exact finals matchup that we saw all of last year. We saw it in spring and in summer. Them splitting, T1 being able to take the spring series, Gen.G taking the summer series, and so here is kind of their tiebreaker, if you will, and I'm really excited to jump into it. I think both of these teams are on good trajectories. T1 has just been unstoppable for the most part in 2023 so far, and Gen.G, I think, has really honed in on what they do best, which is team fighting. I know people call them boring, but their macro is actually insane. They might just be the single best macro team in the entire world, and their team fighting is also very, very good. And so a lot of positives coming out from both sides. I ended up predicting T1 in this series. I think I said 3-1 in favor of T1. That was my prediction, but obviously both of these teams are good enough to be able to hoist the trophy. Not a lot of people saw Gen.G here in the preseason. I was definitely higher on this team than others in their expectations, but even I wasn't expecting them to be top 2. A lot of their players have really come out of their shells, this bot lane in particular. And then for T1, everybody has just dominated. Everybody on the team got first team All-Pro, both in the broadcast and in my predictions and what I would do. And so really an interesting matchup here, but I think I'd slightly favor T1, but it's going to be interesting to see if that ends up coming true. We're going to go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that both teams kind of showed in each particular game and the stakes that the series ended up having as we go throughout. So without further ado, it's time to jump right into game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Gen.G. They are able to take the first game in this series. They're able to go up 1-0, which is a big win for them. Momentum in this series is going to be a very big deal. T1 is a team that, yes, has bounced back before, but they have also had some off days. They are very resilient, but momentum is just going to be generally strong in League of Legends. When you're playing with confidence, when you trust your teammates, when you trust your own abilities and your own decisions, you're just simply going to be playing a lot better. And Gen.G, capitalized on their style in this game. They did just about everything you could have wanted them to do. It was a relatively slow early game, I would say, for both teams, neither really generating a giant lead on each side. T1 goes for this big invade into Gen.G's jungle, and they're able to catch out Peanut for first blood, but basically right after that, the play that they go for in the top lane goes horribly wrong. Zeus and Owner try to dive Doran, and he ends up outplaying it. He ends up getting the 1v2 solo kill in the top lane and surviving. It's a 1-for-0 that basically eliminates all the gold lead that T1 would have been able to generate from that first blood, and we get to this, kind of state in the early game where I would say these teams are just trading back and forth. It's gold going to both sides. Peanut with a nice play bot lane, but it's immediately answered by T1 with a counter kill. Chovy ends up solo killing Zeus, but there's really not a lot to be able to get off of that. Like, a lot of these minor plays that end up going one way or the other, but it's not necessarily giving one team in particular a gigantic lead. Really, where things start to break open, or at least the first time there is any sort of movement in one direction or the other, is actually in favor of T1, because it's first Baron, and T1 are on it. They're definitely in a better position in terms of the macro, in terms of controlling the objectives, and they're on it. Peanut tries to go in, he gets bursted down, they're able to take the Baron, they're able to kill Peanut, they're able to, I believe, kill a couple towers alongside that as well, but a gold lead starting to form for T1, but unfortunately Faker gets caught almost immediately after on this Veigar. T1 trying to posture really aggressively, and the rest of the team just kind of leaves him to die. It's probably the right call on the side of T1, but it's definitely not a great idea, and then the Baron just kind of wears out. There's really not a lot that they can actually get done there, and so we kind of wait for second Baron now, and the fight around second Baron is really where things start to change, because we get a phenomenal double engage combo coming out from Doran's Cask on the Gragas right into a Rakan knockup to hit onto 3 people that sets Pays up to absolutely decimate T1. They're able to get, I believe, a 3 for 0, maybe it was a 4 for 0, something around there, as well as grab the Baron, and all of a sudden that 1.5-ish K gold lead for T1 ends up turning into a 3K gold lead for Gen.G basically instantaneously. That's where the game really broke open, and Gen.G never really let go. They weren't able to close it out on that Baron, but T1 tries to force at the third Baron. Gen.G ends up stealing it, Peanut with a really good smite, and then they just completely ace them in the fight to end the game. Really good stuff from Gen.G, really good wherewithal to be able to stay in this one, because the early game wasn't exactly perfect, but you knew you scaled. I mean, you're looking at the enemy team, you're seeing a Jace, you're seeing, a Varus, they're going to be strong in the late game. Varus, Veigar, Sejuani, Nautilus is a very good combo, but you're going to trust your ability as Gen.G to be able to team fight from even. That's what you've been really good at, especially with Pays getting gold in the mid game and Peanut being on something that you can engage on, and most especially with the way that Doran was playing. He's going to get my player of the game in this one on the Gragas. I think a lot of people were concerned about Doran. I've been notoriously lower on him. Not that I think he's a bad player by any means. I think he's a really solid player, but I don't think he's a superstar up in the top lane. He's trying to prove me wrong in these finals, which I'm so happy to see. I say it all the time on this channel. I'm so happy to be proven wrong in the upper direction, right? If a player that I don't like goes out and has a phenomenal year and a phenomenal game and a phenomenal series, that's what I want to see. I want to see players succeed, even if I don't see it coming. That's what I think we all want as fans here, and Doran definitely succeeded in this one. I already talked a bit about the 1v2 in the top lane, but he was awesome the rest of this game as well. The ults coming out from the Gragas were just simply perfect, setting up so much on the side of Gen.G. If they didn't have a top laner who was doing nearly as much as he was in these team fights, they just wouldn't have won nearly as cleanly. So Doran for me is going to get player of the game, but you got to give a lot of credit to the person who was dealing the damage to clean up a lot of these kills, and that is Pays down in the bot lane. For his first finals, he's looking pretty darn good. It's a really good way to start your finals career. Him and Delight, I think both were sensational in this game, mostly in the late game. Not a lot of action in the bot lane to start the game, but once they got rolling, they really couldn't be stopped. Chovy with some really good plays, he ends up solo killing the Jace at points in the game. Peanut's scoreline doesn't look nearly as good as the rest of his team, but I do think he was making a lot of good plays. He was just the target for most of T1's aggression throughout a lot of the game, and so a lot of good things, I would say, coming out from Gen.G. Not a lot of negatives for me to give out to this team. I think they really executed their game plan and their style really well, and it ended up generating them a 1-0 series lead here. And then for T1, it's certainly not the end of the world for you to lose game number 1 if you're able to bounce back, but there certainly are things that I think you want to kind of look at in terms of maybe how you want to play out the rest of this series. I don't think that you want to try and contest Gen.G in the mid to late game. That's their strength. That's what they're really good at. I think you want to try and push your advantage in the early game a tad bit more. Now, Gen.G did a really good job of being able to counterplay T1 this game, but maybe don't pick Veigar, right? Maybe don't pick Varus. Like, I like these champions. Well, Varus is probably fine, but maybe don't pick Veigar, right? Maybe pick something that can be a little bit more active in the mid game. Obviously, Lissandra was banned, but something in that vein. Talia comes to mind as well. Something that can shove and roam and get out on the map and really make a lot of aggro plays in the early game. If you can get something like that for Faker, I think a lot of your opportunities open up, but Also, your top lane simply has to be better. Zeus is going to get done of the game, and this was a bad game from him. His positioning was bad, his laning was bad, his team fighting was bad. There weren't a lot of positives coming out from this Jace, and that's very concerning. I know Zeus has developed a bit of a reputation for maybe not playing as well in the playoffs, and I'll be honest, this current year's playoffs have certainly not been his best games of all time, and to see him be able to pick up his best champion in Jace and just kind of get wrecked on it in the top lane against a Gragas, like, it's not a great sign. I would say maybe, you know, instead of focusing so much on the top lane, maybe isolate that top lane matchup, go for something a little bit more tanky, and try to get Gumayusi and Keria the pressure that they've been getting all split long. It was interesting to see them go away, I should say, from the bot lane so much in this game, considering that's kind of what got them here in the first place. So definitely some interesting things coming out from T1, but I do think if they get back on track and get their style kind of rolling again, they're going to be at a good spot. But remember, I mean, it only really takes 2 more games. They do not want to lose game number 2, because going down 0-2 to Gen.G, for as good as T1 are, winning 3 in a row against a team as good as Gen.G is not easy. It's certainly not something you can expect. So this is a much more important game than game number 1 for them. It is a must-win, in my opinion. But is T1 going to be able to even up the series, or is Gen.G going to take a pretty commanding lead here? Well, the winner of game number 2 was Gen.G. They are able to take game number 2, and they're able to go up in the series 2-0. And, you know, no matter how you thought the series would eventually end up going, I don't think a lot of people expected to see a 2-0 series lead for Gen.G here, but guess what? They've done it. They are playing as well as they have played all split long. The confidence that they clearly gained from beating KT Rolster as definitively as they did is obviously helping them out an absolute ton. And quite frankly, it's been an absolute joy to watch here. The job obviously isn't over yet, but they've started off this series in such great form, and they've been a really fun team to watch through the first 2 games, playing their style, making aggressive plays, you know, going out and proving that they really are one of the best teams in the world, regardless of the outcome of the series as a whole. But game 2 was a very fun one. Let's go ahead and get down to what ended up happening in the game in particular. Pretty back and forth early game as per usual with these two, neither really generating large leads in and of itself. T1 is able to get a pretty small lead, I would say, though. About 1k throughout most of the early game. A lot of that is because Gen.G is perfectly willing to trade over, you know, fight losses in order to get objectives. They did it with Rift Herald in the first Rift Herald, I should say, where they go and they secure Herald, but they give over 2 or so kills in return. They do it again at Dragon. Peanut is able to secure it. I believe it's like 4th Dragon in the game. Peanut is able to secure it, and they're able to, you know, get a lot of stats from that, and clearly that will come back to become a big deal later in the game, but they end up getting like 3 for 0'd or 4 for 0'd off of the back of that, and T1 is able to generate a lead off of these plays, but Gen.G is hanging tough. Doran, in particular in the top lane, is still doing really well. He ends up solo killing Owner, as Owner just positions way too aggressively. Peanut feels like he gets caught down in the bot lane, but he outplays it, and they end up just trading 1 for 1, so these small leads, I would say, that T1 are able to generate are being counteracted by just mechanical outplays coming in from Gen.G, who have just kind of been the better team, even if they haven't exactly controlled the map as well as they have for most of the split. But again, when you go back to Gen.G, the first word that you are going to use is team fighting. Obviously, Gen.G have some phenomenal macro, and they did show that off in this game. There was a really good macro point, I would say, in the midpoint, where Gen.G just kind of controlled everything that they needed to in the mid game. And, you know, even if T1 had a lead, they were first, and they had prio on pretty much every objective. But really where they generated their large lead and where they were able to start taking this game was the team fighting stage, where things just broke open. Baron is really where things started to get completely obnoxious for Gen.G. An amazing fight again in the mid lane, right around first Baron coming out for Gen.G. Another great engage from Doran with the cask on Gragas. You just can't give him this champion anymore. At some point, you have to say he's just too good on this champion to be allowed to have it in the finals. Another great engage from him, and Pays absolutely dominates and really makes it worthwhile with the Aphelios towards the back half of that fight, able to generate a lot of gold. A ridiculously similar story to what ended up happening in game number 1. Both of those two have been great over the course of this series so far. Delight doing a really good job setting him up as well. Those are the 3 players that I think have really stood out. And if you would have told me that in the finals, Gen.G would have gotten out to a 2-0 lead, and Peanut and Chovy would have been the least important members of the team, I would have been like, oh my god, something's going incredibly wrong for T1. And obviously, we'll get to that, but Doran, Pays, and Delight have been phenomenal there's really not a lot of negatives I can give them. Gen.G does win a few small fights towards the back half of the game. Baron doesn't necessarily convince them to end. They end up being stalled out. They have to go for second Baron, which they get basically for free, and then they also get Soul, and then by that point, they are plenty strong enough to be able to end the game. But Gen.G, knowing that they don't have to overforce things, knowing that they have complete objective control, and that they can win any fight so long as T1 doesn't play it incredibly slow like they did in a lot of circumstances, basically force the other team to make a crazy play. And they did, and they were able to end the game. Doran's gonna get player of the game again for Gen.G. I mean, really, there's just nothing else I can say at this point other than he's really freaking good on this Gragas. You have to take it away from him. You have to make him prove that he can beat you on something else, because his Gragas through the first 2 games has just been sensational. He has destroyed Owner's game both games. In game 1, it was with that counter dive in the top lane, and in game 2, it was just solo killing him while he was trying to take Krugs. It's just really, really good stuff coming out from him, and he's not going to get the credit he deserves. A lot of people are going to look at Paze and talk about how good he has been, but Doran, for me, has easily been the standout member of Gen.G through the first 2 games. That's not to take anything away from Paze and Delight, who continue to be awesome. We have to give ourselves a reminder. Not only is Paze a rookie, the kid is 17 years old. Like, he's the youngest player in the LCK outside of Bulldog, and that's insane to see him perform this well in the finals against T1 at 17 years old. An incredible performance coming out from him. His team fighting is just extraordinary. He is a top 3-ish AD carry in the world in team fights. Like, I truly do believe that. And I think you can make a real case that he's a top 5 ADC in the world, like, full stop. That's how well he has been playing as a 17-year-old. It is insane that Gen.G felt comfortable enough to let Ruler go, and they were right about it. Like, that is just it's just a crazy turn of events, and Delight has been really stepping up in the playoffs as well. These two have incredible chemistry together, and they've really developed that over the course of the year, and it's been fun to watch. Peanut and Chovy were good as well. It's just they weren't the focal points of the game, which is just such a great sentence for Gen.G in their win here. As for T1 on the other side, not a good game. I actually like the draft quite a bit. I think it gives you a lot of options. Caitlyn Lux has been a big pick for T1 all year long. Carry is just so good on the Lux, and Gumayushi was famous for his Caitlyn for quite a while, but again, T1 kind of failing to play through that bot lane. When you draft Caitlyn Lux, I want to see Prio go into Caitlyn Lux, and they just didn't end up doing that. Faker on the Cassante was a little bit more passive this game, was not getting out on the map, was trying to stay in lane, was definitely getting out-roamed by Chovy, which is funny. Imagine telling Reddit that. They'd get so mad. But really, like, the negatives for T1 were the top side of the map. Zeus is going to get another dud of the game for me on the Kennen. No good Kennen ultimate this game. I mean, you can't find me a single good one, which is just bad. He lost in lane to the Gragas, which is never good, and quite frankly, Zeus has had a bad series so far. Doran has outclassed him in pretty much every aspect of the game, and that's going to continue until something changes. I think you've got to take Doran off the Gragas, but Zeus has to start stepping up. He's developed a reputation for not playing as well in major finals, and unfortunately, it feels like that is carrying over here into spring. But Owner also had a pretty bad game on the Viego. Yes, his fighting was okay, and he was able to get some resets, but man, he was just out of position a lot. Completely out-jungled in the early game in terms of objective control, even if he was able to pull back some kills, and just was never able to turn any of the pressure that he created into actual gold for the team. I think if you had a more dominant jungle performance, that 1k gold could have been a 3 or 4k gold lead, and then you go into that Baron fight looking a little bit better. But T1 unfortunately just not able to get it done, but they're now on series point. They gotta get it done now. You do not want to get swept in the finals after having such a dominant year, after having every single one of your players on first team All-Pro. For you to get swept in the finals would be an absolute disaster for T1, and so Gen.G really, really looking for that. What a statement it would be from this Gen.G team to decimate T1 in the finals. But are they going to be able to do it? Are they going to be able to complete the sweep, or is T1 going to be able to survive at the very least until game number 4? Well, the winner of game number 3 was T1. They are able to take game number 3, and they're able to survive one more game at the very least here in the LCK finals. Big win from them. Obviously, you don't want to get swept in the finals, and you avoid that with this, but it certainly needs to compound into something more. You don't just want to be a team that survived one game against Gen.G and just kind of fell after that. Obviously, this is a great win for this team, and they really needed it, but hopefully this can be the start of some momentum building for T1. They played this game relatively well, a lot of things kind of going in their favor. This was kind of the opposite of some of the previous games. Not to say their team fighting was perfect quite like Gen.G's was, especially in that game 2, but Gen.G the one making early plays, T1 kind of surviving them, and then growing into a lead with a big Baron fight. It sounds familiar because it should over the last 3 games that we have gotten in this series. It's just this time it is T1 coming out on top in how it was executed, but let's go ahead and go over how exactly we got there. Gen.G making a lot of plays early. T1 does a good job trying to keep them close, but I really do like the aggression that was shown from Gen.G in the early game. It's not really something that we've seen from them all throughout the year. Clearly, their confidence is high after the first 2 games, and they were going for some stuff. Doran baits Zeus as much as possible in the top lane, takes a tower shot when already at half health to get down to maybe slightly less than a fourth, health. And, Zeus obviously is like, oh, this is a free kill, but it was a bait the entire time. Peanut and Chovy were there the whole time, and they're able to pick up a kill onto the Scion for first blood. Chovy moving around the map everywhere. He was actually really good this game. A lot of people get on Chovy for not being proactive. If you want to say that Chovy's not proactive, whatever, man. I'm just not going to be able to take it seriously. You haven't watched him play in the last 2 years. I understand where the narrative came from if you watched him in 2019 and 2020, but if you've watched him in 2022 and 2023, you just cannot have that opinion anymore. I just don't see it as even remotely viable. He has been so much more active than Faker in this series, and he showed that off in the early game, that play in the top lane we talked about. He goes for a nice dive in the bot lane, which they are able to pull off, but they do end up trading 1-for-1 back, and so not exactly like a dominant win, but, again, very similar to what we've been seeing through the first couple of games. Guma becomes the big target, both for good and for bad, in the mid game. Really, it's all about this Jinx in the mid game. Guma playing incredibly well, able to snipe out a couple of people with Ahri, ends up sniping Peanut after a really nice fight, and then he gets Doran in the top lane as well with it, and he's able to generate a nice lead for this quote-unquote hyper carry. Jinx, I think she's pretty good at it right now, but the rest of the team isn't exactly set up to be able to facilitate her at the same level that maybe some other team comps would. Still, Gumayushi playing incredibly well, but Gen.G kind of recognizes that, and they realize they need to dump a lot of resources into taking down Guma, and so they do. A lot of, full dives coming out from Delight and Chovy and Peanut just to make sure that this Jinx can't be nearly as effective. However, the problem ends up being that T1 can get a lot off of the fact that Gen.G is blowing a lot of cooldowns onto their AD carry. They still have a strong Vigar. The Wukong can go in. There are ways to win fights without the Jinx, and we kind of saw that around that second Herald fight where T1 honestly takes a 4v5 and does relatively well with it, even without Gumayushi, who was picked off slightly before it. And from that point on, T1 just kind of has pressure all over the map. We get this big fight at Baron, big shocker. That's kind of the experience that we've gotten here in this series so far. A big fight around Baron that Delight in particular actually plays pretty phenomenally, is able to go in and out of range to avoid the Vigar cage. Really just does a great job of playing on the edge of pressure, but T1 is just simply too strong. They're able to steal the Baron out from underneath Gen.G. They're able to win the fight, and then really it's not that much longer after that they just kind of rush down mid lane and just end the game. They win one more fight, and it's kind of a back and forth fight that isn't super conclusive, and they're just able to end off of that. Really, I would say clean ending here from T1. Not exactly the best game overall from them, but definitely a clean way to have it finish off. My player of the game is absolutely Gumayushi. He was the entire target of everything for this game. He was the main character, if you will, and I know a lot of people were critical of Guma getting first team All-Pro. I certainly wasn't, but I could definitely understand why. He is surrounded by a ridiculous amount of talent, but I think to underplay what Gumayushi is capable of is not fair to him just because he has really good teammates, right? You should look at the process and the package as a whole. Your teammates should not decide how good you are as a player. I think that for both good and for bad, there are some players that I think get made to look a little bit better than they actually are because of their teammates, and some players that I think maybe don't get the spotlight nearly on them enough because of their teammates. I think Guma kind of falls into that latter category. He was really good over the course of the year, even if he wasn't as flashy as someone like Keria or Faker or Owner, right? He was still really, really good, and he proved that again in this series. But Keria was really good on Kench. I actually really liked Faker this game. The cages coming out from the Vigar were really impressive, and just because he wasn't getting out on the map doesn't mean that it wasn't positive. I do think that Vigar scaling up and getting a ridiculous amount of CS and gold and AP off of the stacking is just honestly going to be more valuable than if Chovy's going bot lane and just trading 1-for-1. And so, good stuff overall from T1. I thought they knew their win condition and played to it well, and they survived, which is obviously the most important part. But then for Gen.G on the other side, not the end of the world. Losing one game in this series is at the very least expected. You probably didn't expect to just sweep T1 off the Rift, but you got to be able to bounce back. You certainly don't want this T1 team to take you to a Game 5 after having won 2 in a row. You want to nip this in the bud while you can. My dud of the game is going to go to Doran. He was the player of the game in the first 2, and the dud of the game in game number 3. It wasn't exactly like a horrible game for him. Again, he made a good play early on to kind of bait Zeus out of the tower range, but outside of that, the Gnar just was really ineffective this game. I think you could realistically give this to Pays as well, who just didn't really do all that much damage on the Xayah, even if he wasn't playing bad, or I think alternatively, you could give it to Peanut, but I do like some of the ultimates that he was able to do. So for me, Doran was probably the most, like, useless, quote-unquote, member of Gen.G, but not a lot of, like, majorly negative plays, not a lot of getting caught out, just a lot of not exactly perfect plays overall. But Game 4 is actually going to be really interesting. Yes, T1 is still down, but if they win that Game 4, we're going to a Game 5, and it's winner take all with T1 winning 2 in a row. And so you want to try and shut this down if you are Gen.G as quickly as possible, and they're going to have the opportunity to. Is Gen.G going to be able to take it in 4, or is T1 going to surprisingly come back and take this to 5? Well, the winner of game number 4 was Gen.G. They are able to take game number 4, and they are able to close out the series. They are able to close out the split, and they are able to walk away with another LCK title, an unreal finals win for Gen.G. Nobody gave them the credit they deserved going into this series. Nobody saw them being able to outlast a team like T1. Nobody thought that they were going to be going up against the best team in the world, in most people's opinion, and just outplaying them mechanically, but here we are. That is exactly what happened. Gen.G was sensational in this game and in the series as a whole. There's really just a lot of positives to take away, almost no negatives. Yes, could you say some things about game number 3? Maybe, but 1, 2, 4, it just shows you the power that this Gen.G team can have when they are playing at their best, when they're playing their style, when they can really lean on the talent of their players, and I'm just so happy and so excited for this team that everyone counted out in the preseason to be walking away with the 2023 Spring Split Trophy. Really excited for them. But what ended up happening? How did we get here in game number 4? Well, it was actually another T1 early game lead. Notice a trend? I've actually talked about this a lot in my videos across every region. It's actually astounding how frequent it is that teams are coming back in the playoffs right now. And it's not like these are gigantic gold leads or anything like that, but the entirety of the LPL playoffs in particular have just been comeback after comeback after comeback. Down 1K, 2K, 3K, 5K, 10K, we've seen it all, right? Like, the team that's winning at 10 minutes has like a less than 50% win rate, it feels like, over the last few weeks, and it's just kind of insane the direction that the game is going in, but it does make for some fun games to watch, I can definitely say that. And that was the case here. T1 gets a small lead in the early game. Zeus gets a solo kill in the top lane on Doran, a little bit of revenge for the first couple of games of this series. Really nice stuff coming out from him on the Sion. He looked much better on that champion than he did on the more aggressive picks. And then, you know, T1 able to get you more plays as well. Faker and Owner play a beautiful gank mid, engage basically perfectly. Faker hits the charm. Owner follows up with it as perfect as you could possibly get it. Really not a lot of negatives. No notes. They're really, really good. Big shocker. They're really, really good. But that T1 lead is not very stable because it's not just enough, right? Like, it's not enough to be able to close out the game. You still need to be able to make plays and stay proactive in the mid to late game, and you know, while I can say they tried to make plays, a lot of them were not very good. Faker multiple times in the mid game just getting completely caught out in the wrong position, being over-aggressive with this team not on the same page. Not a very good game from Faker, and it's unfortunate that in the closeout game, your legendary mid doesn't exactly perform all that well, but it just wasn't a very good game from him. Jinx ends up getting incredibly strong in the mid game. Pays gets like a triple kill on a really bad engage where Faker just gets caught out and T1 tries to save him, and then all of a sudden this Jinx is ridiculously online. You've got a Maokai and a Cassante that's going to be able to enable her, and then a Tristana for secondary damage. This is a really dangerous comp to play in, and while T1 does try and find some nice engages towards the back half of the game, it's just not going to be enough. Gen.G controls Baron, they control the map, and they control every fight as long as they get that front to back, as long as they're not ambushed or sabotaged or overextending like they did in that Death Bush in the mid game there, or in the late game, I should say, then they're probably just going to be able to win the fight, which is what we saw in that final fight in the mid lane, that Paze just wins from being too strong. Like, he is simply just too far ahead at that point. The Jinx is doing a ridiculous amount of damage. Credit to Guma. He does his absolute best to save this game on the side of T1. He was easily the best performer on T1 in this series, but Paze was honestly just too strong and too good at this point in the game, and it ends up being over. Really, really good stuff coming out from Gen.G, and I'm just so happy and proud of this team. Paze is going to get my player of the game for the closeout one. He's 17 years old. I can't reiterate this enough. He was born in 2005. That makes me feel old. I'm turning 25 soon, and I shouldn't be feeling old about anybody, but Paze and his talent level makes me feel old, which is ludicrous, but he was just so good in this series. It's crazy how you can get rid of Ruler and honestly not even feel it, and bring in a 17-year-old and not even feel it. He really is that good, and he has stepped up to become one of the best AD carries in the world. I don't even think it's really all that debatable. You can argue whether he's top 5, but you cannot argue whether he's top, 10 at the very worst, but, to me, he's top 6, basically no question. Top 7 if you really like a couple of players, but top 5 is certainly well within the reach, especially after how he played in this series. Him and Delight have great chemistry together on the Jinx and the Lulu, and they were great across this whole series. Another player that was great across the whole series, and my player of the series personally, my finals MVP, is going to go to Doran in the top lane. I know the broadcast gave it to Paze, and I totally get it. He was really, really consistent, especially in the late game, and his KDA was the best across all 3 games, not even close, but to me, Doran was the one creating a lot of those plays in the early games, and even in this game where he wasn't particularly great in laning phase, he was awesome in the team fights and was really doing a lot to be able to push Gen.G forward. The top gap that was created in this series, especially in the beginning part, was, in my opinion, the biggest reason why Gen.G was able to walk out of this with the 3-1 series lead, and Doran deserves the credit for that. He's going to be my player of the series, my finals MVP here. And it's just really, really good to see. To see Doran, Paze, and Delight be the 3 that really stepped up for Gen.G in their title series, that's just awesome. There's nothing else to say. Peanut and Chovy being the secondary carries, the quote-unquote afterthoughts, it's just got to be so fun for them to be able to get carried to a title with all of the work that they did last year on that team as well. Just really good stuff coming out from Gen.G, and you cannot doubt this team any longer. They have proven everybody who doubted them wrong, and they're making their way to MSI as the #1 seed from the LCK. As for T1, on the other side, definitely not the final series that they were looking for. A lot of people saw this as a cakewalk for them. They saw them as the best team in the world, let alone the LCK, and they couldn't quite get the job done in the finals. I still have a lot of faith in this team, but some of the question marks did arise. Closing out games against teams that are really, really good at being able to control the pacing and slowing down T1, even when they're able to generate those early leads, was a question mark. Guma played really well in a lot of these team fights, but Faker in Game 4 wasn't great. Owner was phenomenal in Game 4, but Zeus and Owner in the first 2 games weren't all that great. The inconsistency of these players, and quite frankly, just getting outplayed mechanically, was definitely on display, and it does raise some question marks. I'm not sure how repeatable this series is, but it does open some eyes at the very least for what is possible for this T1 team. Faker, like I said, is my dud of the game for Game 4. He was just very, very bad, consistently getting caught out. Over usage of the Zhonya's when you're playing against the Jinx can be an absolute death sentence, and we saw that in this game. Faker felt comfortable going in, trying to hit Charm, and if it doesn't work, then he can just Zhonya's, and he can, try to let the rest of the team fight kind of play out, but Jinx just throws her chompers down underneath him. When the Zhonya's are active, he comes right back out and immediately dies, and that happened, I want to say all 3 of his deaths were just completely avoidable, and it's frustrating, right? But, it's Faker. I expect him to be able to turn it around. Owner turned it around in Game 4, but wasn't exactly good in Games 1 and 2. I think you could say a very similar thing about Zeus. And then Guma was just really good throughout this series, but not good enough to be able to outduel what Paze was doing on the other side. There are positives for T1, but they're going to have to figure some stuff out. It's not going to be quite as clean of a trip to MSI as they thought. Of course, with the LCK winning Worlds last year, both of the LCK seeds at MSI do get to skip the play-in stage. They are the only region that gets to skip the play-in stage. So both of these teams already slotted into the main stage of MSI, but it's going to be interesting to see how T1 rebounds. This is really the first bit of adversity that they've faced all split long. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with it, but for Gen.G, congratulations. There's really just not a lot that I can say, negative towards this team. Everybody counted them out at the beginning of the split. Nobody thought that they were going to be able to contend right after losing Ruler and bringing in a rookie, but here they are, winning Spring Split and heading to MSI as the #1 seed. Alright, but that is going to do it for my LCK Spring Finals overview and analysis, and for my Spring Split in the LCK overview and analysis. I've covered every single game, I've covered every single playoff series, I've covered every single team, and it's come to an end. It is now MSI time for the LCK, and for the rest of the teams, it's going to be rebuilding time, trying to figure out what they want to do moving into summer, but it's been a lot of fun covering this split for you guys. The LCK is my favorite region in the world, you know, not to be biased or anything. Maybe a little bit less so this year with some of the games that we got, but historically speaking, it's always been my favorite region to cover, and I really hope you guys enjoy the videos. If you do, let me know down in the comment section below, and, you know, I don't normally advertise a ton of the rest of my content on here, but ad retention, or watch retention, I should say, is so massive on the channel that if you guys do enjoy what I do here and you're a fan of the LCK content and you haven't checked out some of the other regions, it really would mean a lot to me if you went and did that. Those are going to be linked up in the iCard right now. A big playlist to every video that I've uploaded in Spring Split's going to be linked up there, but I also have individual playlists for all 5 of the regions I cover. But just in general, I'm really thankful for you guys, and I really appreciate all the nice comments and everything, the support that you guys have given. Obviously, give some support on this video as well. Hit that like button if you enjoyed it, but, you know, everything that you guys have done over the course of the split so far has been great, and I think we've cultivated a really nice audience here. But, you know, now that Gen.G are champions, it's definitely time to move on to MSI. That coverage is going to be starting in just a couple of weeks here. Obviously, everybody's got to tone down the rest of their stuff first, with LEC ending in a couple of weeks, only a couple of days before MSI. It's going to be interesting to see how things end up progressing, but I'm really, really excited to get into it, so hit that subscribe button if you do want to get more coverage on that when it ends up coming out. You want to hit that bell so you can get notifications when those videos go live. But, of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.